Huge news in the Hoyoverse, as for the very first time, a Hoyo game will receive direct buffs for old and outdated characters. Of course, this is not happening in Genshin Impact yet. It has currently been announced for Honkai Star Rail, which has had its fair share of criticism recently because of the alleged rampant power creep happening in that game. Well, Genshin Impact is starting its power creep arc too, and with Genshin historically taking many cues from Honkai Star Rail in terms of quality of life improvements, I do think it's reasonable to anticipate character buffs for older characters eventually. After all, what better way to spice up dead banners than with actual real buffs? Let's talk about it. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. First of all, not only were the buffs announced in a live stream, but they're even actually playable in the story, as well as being anticipated in advance by pre-release information. I know a lot of you don't play Honkai Star Rail, so I won't go into very much detail there, but I wanted to give you an idea of the kind of buffs we could be talking about. This is one of my favorite characters in Star Rail, Silverwolf. She was one of the first characters released in the game in patch 1.1 or something like that, and she had the very broken ability at the time of applying a weakness that was on your team to the enemy. She did have restrictions. She only applied weakness to a single enemy, and it was a random weakness from one of the elements on your team. She also did some other stuff, such as debuffing the enemy, but the big problem is that very quickly other buffers came out that just did more. AoE became much more important, and Silverwolf was relegated to basically no uses at all, even though at the beginning of the game people thought she would be something like the Kazuha of Honkai Star Rail, but basically now she's useless. Well, now as you can see in this trial, first of all, she's applying a weakness with her ultimate, which I don't think she can do normally. Maybe that's added, maybe that's new, or maybe I'm misunderstanding what's going on here. But she's also applying weakness to multiple enemies, to 3 enemies in fact. And on top of that, she is guaranteed to add the weakness from the first character. So not only did they just buff a character, they did the right kind of buffing. Not just like a little damage buff, not a meaningless buff. I don't know that Silverwolf will be high meta. I don't keep up with Star Rail. I think that they're power creeping her the same patch that she's getting buffed, or the patch right before. But the fact remains, she'll go from pretty much 0 usage to actually being a decent unit, at least from what I can tell. So honestly, I can see this coming to Genshin Impact in a very similar form. And I've made a list of the different characters that I think could be buffed, because honestly, this is something I've always dreamed about, and I think it'd be really fun to talk about, especially since we can actually be creative, like, because this actually could happen theoretically. I know a lot of you are going to say I'm high on copium, but I really think that this is worth talking about, that this actually could happen one day. It makes financial sense for Genshin to do something like this, and now there's finally precedent that they actually could. You might say, well, Honkai Star Rail is so much newer than Genshin, you know, why wouldn't Genshin do this first? First of all, Honkai Star Rail is rapidly catching up to Genshin in terms of character releases. They release 2 characters every single patch, 2 5-star characters. So power creep has been on a much steeper rise than Genshin, and Honkai Star Rail has historically been a lot more experimental with new game stuff in general. So I really do think it could come to Genshin. Let's talk about it. So most of these characters, I feel like they're fine, or they're too new. Like, obviously, Sejuani really needs a buff. I hope that she could, like, I hope that they would give her a buff, but she just came out, so it seems like they want her to be bad on purpose. So I have her in too new or don't need one. Hu Tao also jumps out at me as being a pretty old character, but she's still pretty strong. She still feels pretty good to use, so I don't know that they need to buff Hu Tao. One argument against Genshin giving direct character buffs is it's a lot easier for Genshin to buff characters indirectly than in Honkai Star Rail, or at least they're more creative in Genshin. I don't know if it actually is easier, but they're definitely better at it in Genshin. Whether it's actually easier or not, it could be because of the nature of Honkai Star Rail being turn-based that it's harder to indirectly buff units, but I feel that I'm not so sure about that. It could be, you know, a creativity issue. For example, characters like Shenhe, Ayaka, and Wriothesley, if you're in the know, you know that they're getting a really big buff with a new character coming next patch. I'm not going to talk about it until the drip marketing for that new character comes out, but that's an example of them indirectly buffing older characters. Now, that does require you to get the new character to buff the old character. I still think this is good. I still think this is acceptable, but some characters are so significantly behind others that they actually need an individual buff, and I don't know that there's any way to do it in a side way, like in a indirect way. I think you might need actual direct buffs for the characters for a lot of these. Shenhe, I'm right on the edge. Like, she is sort of a side grade for most of the plunge teams. So it'd be nice for her to actually be definitively best in slot for Gaming, for example. It'd be nice for her to never lose to Bennett at C0 for Xiao teams instead of being worse in AoE, even though she has an upgrade in quality of life. But she is good enough that I wouldn't necessarily say she needs a buff, so that's why I have her here. These are characters that I think would like one, but they're unlikely to get one for a while. I've been playing some Xiao. I've been getting some pretty good clears with him. I'm kind of reasonably happy with how strong he is. He could use a little buff just to make him Adeptus level strong or something like that, but I am generally pretty happy with him. Wanderer, I've been getting a bit worse clears with Wanderer, but I need to get his weapon, so I don't know. Let me know what you think about Wanderer. I think he needs one a bit more than Xiao. Ayato would definitely like one. I think he's more likely than Xiao and Wanderer, at least first. His damage numbers are really low. By the way, I'm going to get more specific with what I recommend or what I would like to see in character buffs as we move up the list. Xiao and Wanderer, I would like to see Wanderer get what Chaska has, where she flies up high enough that enemies' attacks completely miss her, whereas Wanderer just doesn't have that. Stuff hits them all the time. I would really like to see that for Wanderer. I would like to see his normals have a better AoE and overall just a little bit better scaling. That's what I'd like from Wanderer. For Xiao, I'd like to see him then rework his constellations. For Ayato, I'd like to see the buff from his burst be much bigger. That would be really nice. Like, and his buff, I don't know if it applies to himself. He gives a normal attack buff with his burst. I'd like to see it be much bigger so that you could maybe use him as a normal attack support for a character like Yoimiya. Maybe some sort of dual DPS stuff, or maybe you also buff his burst so it applies way more hydro so that you could more realistically vape with characters like Yoimiya or Arlecchino, and you could turn him into like a support slash DPS hybrid. Other than that, maybe just better scaling. Maybe you give him a bit longer of a infusion window so that you can have more time to do more slashes, so he's a more competent DPS. He has a really weird DPS window. I would like to see it last a bit longer. Dea, I would love them to buff Dea. I'd love them to either give her more numbers for her burst. I'd like them to either proc normal attack stuff, better HP scaling, or not better HP scaling, just better scaling in general. I'd like to see her maybe be more self-sufficient, for her to apply pyro a little bit faster. I don't know, there's literally a million things you could do for Dea. She has a really interesting kit. They just need to either make her better at being defensive or better at being offensive. But she is a standard character, so kind of like Mizuki, who also needs a buff, but I doubt it's going to happen. They need to give Baiju a way bigger buff to his reaction buff, because he has a reaction buff. It's just so super small. He buffs Dendro reactions, but they need to like 10 times that reaction multiplier, that buff multiplier, so that he can actually be a competent support. The new standard is for healers to really do big things, and Baiju does not do big things. He just applies some Dendro, which frankly isn't good enough anymore. I'd also like to see a better AoE Dendro application for his off-field skill. For Nilou, honestly, she's a character that I feel could just get an indirect buff from an EM scaling hydro character. I would also accept a buff for Nilou, but I feel like her kit has a really cool design, and I don't really think that the kit needs all that much. Maybe they make it so cores can break shields better, or that you can still create blooms when, like, you can still create blooms when there's elemental shields going on, and the cores do damage to any type of elemental shield, not just, you know, hydro and electro ones. You could also make it so her cores have increased damage when there's only one enemy on the field. That's what I would do with Nilou. You have cores that increase damage when there's only one enemy on the field, and that way she has a much better use in single target. Those are the buffs I would like to see for Nilou. And Nahida, I know a lot of people still find Nahida broken, and I think Nahida is a good character. I don't think she like needs a buff, but I think it'd be amazing if her elemental skill refreshed automatically from off field, so you don't have to switch back onto her. That's a problem in a few teams nowadays, so I think that would really help. I think just increasing the scaling on her elemental skill would go a long way as well. And I think increasing, maybe reducing her burst cost so it's easier to do her burst every rotation, and maybe increasing the buff that her burst gives, giving even maybe a little bit bigger of an EM buff, or buffing damage bonus as well, or something like that. I think that would be really, those would be really nice for Nahida, just to keep her a bit level with the newer characters. Now we get to the ones that I think are much more needed and should get one much sooner. And then we'll do the 4 that I think that they would start with, because Honkai Star Rail started with 4, and then I'm presumably they'll do other ones. Albedo, make his burst scale off of defense. Obviously, it's insane that his burst scales off of attack. Make it so his flower doesn't get destroyed by everything, and make the AoE maybe a little bit bigger. You could increase his numbers a little bit, but I think even those other things would really help him a lot. If his burst was like an actual real nuke, his flower didn't get destroyed, and he had a bit bigger AoE, you might not even need to increase the scaling of his skill, but obviously it wouldn't hurt. For Ganyu, you know, it'd be great, some interruption resistance while she's charging her charge shot. I know that that's like not something that they've ever done, and it maybe doesn't make quite sense, but maybe it's like when her burst is going, she has like increased interruption resistance, or something like that, or while her skill is on the field, or I don't know, something, or just while she's charging, I don't know, could be some sort of new passive. I think that that would just help her so much to not need to run shielded teams. That would be really, really great. I think it's unfortunate because her burst kind of doesn't want to be used in Moika melt teams, so it'd be nice if you could somehow fix it so that you could still use the burst in melt teams without worrying about messing up melts. I'm not exactly sure how you do that. Yoimiya is really, really easy. She's a fireworks character that doesn't have AoE from her fireworks blast, and she does less single target damage than Hu Tao. So let's make Yoimiya an AoE character. Let's make her just do blasts of, like, it hits one enemy and then it just blasts in an AoE when it explodes. Like, she fires her arrows, and then the 3rd and 5th normal attack, which are already the strong hits, they blast in AoE. It's like pew 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 pew. And make her yeah, maybe she can't do as many vape stuff, but then you can actually put her in an overload team, and for AoE, she would actually be good. So that's the first thing you do for Yoimiya. The second thing is that you make her burst actually do something. Instead of buffing the attack of your other characters, she should buff all types of damage, like the damage bonus of all your off-field characters, and buff herself, and it should just do like 10 times the damage or 5 times the damage or something like that, and make her burst actually good. That would be awesome. That would fix Yoimiya, I think. Itto. I feel like Itto's kit is like pretty much fine. Like, it's kind of hard to use his combos properly, but his kit pretty much makes sense. Maybe you could reduce his energy cost. That would be nice, but that is a constellation. He just kind of needs more numbers. Any agreeers? Like, I feel like Itto's kit it sort of makes sense. He has solid AoE. He could just use a bit more damage, I feel. It'd be just nice for him to do enough damage that his best team at Constellation 0 was actually his intended best team, and not like Moika, Farina, Shilonen crap. Like, let's, you know, that would be nice. Kokomi, I think that you lean into Kokomi's damage and her on-field playstyle, because I know that people have historically used her as that support, like the Nilou teams, just the healing for freeze teams. But I feel like Kokomi is meant to use her burst. She's meant to be an on-fielder. So let's just jack up her damage, right? Let's just make her a DPS unit and make her mono hydro comp more relevant. Maybe make her damage scale off of her healing, so that, like, I know it's already scales off of her HP, but it'd be kind of nice to keep her using the Ocean Hued Clam artifact set. So I'm trying to think of a way to do that, like to keep her using that artifact set while also having her do more damage. While you're at it though, make her jellyfish last a bunch longer. That would be nice. For Yaimiko, you make it so her burst, it refreshes the duration of the turrets. You don't have to cast them again. That would reduce her field time quite a bit and make her a lot more of an option versus a character like Fischl. And then from there, I feel like you could do one of two things. You either increase the damage of her totems, or you increase the AoE of them. If you make her have actually good AoE, then that would be pretty nifty, or more damage. So that's what I think you do for Yoimiiko. Also, you give her infinite interruption resistance while she's using her skills so that she can't be knocked around as easily. And I think that those two things should pretty much fix her. Sino, he needs more numbers, I think. Either that or you lean into his Hyperbloom playstyle and you have like, you add in like a passive where it increases the damage or decreases resistance or does, yeah, some sort of damage amp for bloom related reactions like hyper bloom reactions based on his EM. So you kind of carve him more into that hyper bloom niche. You of course also reduce his burst cost, just 10 or 20 would be great. And you make it so that he can swap out and keep his infusion. I don't think that one is as important if you also buff Nahida and give her refreshing for multi-wave, but it would still be nice to fix that, so you have that option for like aggravate stuff. And then finally for Raiden, I just feel like a lot of these characters, so here's what some might say. Some might say, oh, Genshin won't do this because if they do this, then they won't make new characters, and they can't make new characters and sell the new characters. But the thing is, Hoyoverse already has these characters, first of all, and they still want to sell them to new players. That's first of all. But second of all, I think there's a fairly big difference from the DPS potential of these units that I'm talking about and the new units. A new unit coming out will not be threatened by buffed versions of almost all of these characters because they're just so far behind. Sure, if we buff Arlecchino too much, yeah, that might cut into Moika's sales because they're somewhat closer. They're still pretty far away, but they're somewhat closer. If we buff Chlorand, then she'll cut into Varessa's sales, of course. But buffing Yoimiya is not cutting into anyone's sales because there's plenty of room to make her way better and still have her be significantly worse than the newer characters. So Raiden as well. I feel like as an Archon, as a very popular unit, let's buff her. Give her built-in crit rate based on her, or crit damage based on her energy recharge. It's extremely hard to build crit on Raiden right now. If any Raiden mains are out there, you know the struggle. So just give her a boatload of crit based on her ER so that you can actually build a good crit rate, crit damage Raiden without actually dying, because it is insane how hard it is to build this character. Characters these days just get way more crit built into their kits, whether it's Chlorand giving 20 free crit rate to herself or Moika being able to get 40 crit from her artifact set. Give Raiden, 30, 40 crit built into her kit and she's pretty much good. Also, I'd really like to see them bump up her energy restoration abilities. Yeah, it's like not bad and it's nice that you can reduce ER requirements, but I'd like to see it be a lot more drastic. Maybe attached to her initial slash, based on the slash's damage or based on her own ER still, she restores additional energy from that initial slash. I feel like that would really, really help the character. And yes, I do think Raiden needs a buff. She's an Archon. She should be a top tier unit. That's why I think that Nahida and Raiden need buffs. Also, move her C6 to her Constellation 1. Her C6, if you don't know, reduces the cooldown of other characters, or just add that to her base kit. It's not that crazy of a passive, but it would help her team rotations quite a bit. All right, now for the 4 characters that I think Genshin would actually buff immediately. And they're some of the earlier characters, but I think they're the characters that need it the most. And maybe Eula, maybe you swap Eula with one of the other really early characters. But I feel like she's just got nothing, absolutely nothing forever. So yeah, so Venti obviously first. How do you fix Venti? He's one of the hardest ones, to be honest. I think you make the AoE of his burst be a lot bigger and give it a bit stronger of a pull. And what I think that would be fun is if you give it infusion damage. So his tornado infuses with an element. I think it'd be really cool to make it sort of Chaska-like, where he does additional damage based on that element, and maybe he even buffs that type of damage across your whole team. So whatever his burst infuses with, he buffs that damage on your team, and maybe by a very substantial amount. So he's actually worth using as a buffer and not just as a grouper that they've made basically useless anymore. So yeah, you give him a way bigger tornado and it buffs the element that he swirls, and yeah, I think that would really, really help Venti. Zhongli, just make his meatball do like 5 times more damage. Instead of critting for, 300k or whatever, just make it hit for 1 million. Just let him do real damage as a nuker DPS. We all love seeing the meatball. We all hate that it's a DPS loss. Just give it way bigger scalings. That would just be incredible. Let his pillar never be destroyed, or make it always summon, make it so you can't climb on it during battle. Probably same with Albedo's elevator, although they do kind of have a use with that new boss, so maybe nowadays, I don't know, maybe you don't want to do that. But make his pillar have a way bigger AoE so that tenacity can proc better. Make the pillar resonance damage like way stronger. So make his like off-field geo damage actually relevant, so you could use him as a sub DPS. And I think if you do this, then Zhongli is pretty good. Eula, man, she's a character that really could just use buffs from other characters that actually buff physical damage. But if we're just buffing Eula, what do you give her? Just more numbers? Maybe reduce the amount of hits it takes to give her full stacks. Fix her so she actually works properly with Mika for her burst exploding. Like if you switch out early, make it so Mika actually works. I think giving her, kind of like I said with Nilou, giving her normals and her burst extra shield breaking abilities so that she can much more easily break through shields. I think giving her burst a much bigger AoE, so if an enemy moves, they don't have to be like right beside you to hit it, and just maybe double the damage. Just something like that. I think those things would be good. And then for Childe, well, he really needs more playstyles than just national, I think. It's never super cool to have a character pretty much be tied to just one archetype. And Childe's an OG. We want to see him have more teams. How do you do that other than just giving him like more damage? Make his cooldown less punishing for sure, because it's kind of annoying as like a newer player to like manage his cooldown. So a much less punishing cooldown, a bunch more damage, bigger AoE. Do you need to do anything else? I don't know. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. What exactly you want to see for buffs for Genshin, if you think I'm totally out to lunch and this will never happen. But I do think it will happen eventually. Let me know if I'm high on copium. Subscribe while you're down there. And if you don't want to do any of that, that is totally fine. Just watching the video has been more than enough. Thanks so much. Bye for now.